Let's now have a look at what actually happened at Gallipoli. Most Australians have heard of Gallipoli. Not everyone knows what was going on at that battle. In fact, most Australians have informed their opinion of what happened at Gallipoli solely based upon Peter Weir's movie Gallipoli, which was made in 1981, and I'm playing a scene of in the screen here now for you to have a look at. The movie does a lot of really amazing things, but we need to realise that this movie isn't a documentary. In fact, the movie captures a number of issues that are fairly significant, but not all. It captures the spirit of the Anzac legend, which is important to our cause. It visually depicts many of the important aspects of the time: the uniforms, the shape of trenches, the geography, the challenges faced by the troops, the hardships, the emotional experiences, and the Gallipoli campaign generally. So as you look at the imagery here, you can see that Peter Weir has got the supply area down on Anzac Cove that many students hear of. We've got the colouring of the uniforms. We've got the different designs being done. We actually even see in one scene where Australian soldiers are making explosives on the shoreline. But it's really important for us to get our head around that this film was never intended to be a complete history lesson. It does some really amazing stuff, and I definitely say go and watch it. If you haven't seen it, it is a brilliant movie, but it's not a history lesson. When we need to study Gallipoli, it's important for us to locate Gallipoli in the world. It's in Europe. When we get to Europe, we can see Gallipoli located down near the Black Sea, near the Mediterranean Sea, near the Aegean Sea. So take a moment to get a sense of where Gallipoli is in that little white square on screen. Now, Gallipoli is a peninsula which is part of the Ottoman Empire. So again, looking at your screen, you can see where the Ottoman Empire is. Note where Egypt is on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. This is going to be important for us to understand as well. When we look at Gallipoli, we need to understand why Australian soldiers were there. Australian soldiers were there because of where Gallipoli was in relation to the Western Front and where Gallipoli was in relation to Russia. So let's think through some of the issues. The Gallipoli campaign was an attempt to break the stalemate that had developed on the Western Front after the failed Schlieffen Plan, and think about what that was. Secondly, Gallipoli campaign existed as the Triple Entente allies tried to open a new front in the southeastern part of Europe to relieve pressure on that Western Front. So if the Western Front is here and the Eastern Front's there, Gallipoli is the start of a new southeastern front. Take a moment to look at the key again. Hit pause if you need to. Think about what I'm trying to explain to you. Next, Gallipoli is an attempt to knock the German and Austro-Hungarian ally, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, out of the war, to fatally wound the Central Powers. So Ottoman Empire's here, Austria-Hungary, Germany. This is an attempt to knock Turkey out of the war. The capital of Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, was Constantinople. Next, the Gallipoli campaign was an attempt to open up the sea route for British and French troops to get supplies into Russia. So I'll say it again carefully. The Gallipoli campaign was an attempt to capture the sea route to allow the British and French navies to get supplies through the Black Sea from the Mediterranean to Russia, its ally. Lastly, it was an attempt to ensure that sea route was safe for British and French troops. The strip of water through here called the Dardanelles, and the Bosphorus, but the Dardanelles, had on it floating explosive mines and was guarded on both sides by Turkish cannon emplacements, gun emplacements, artillery emplacements. And we can see that now on this next map. Floating mines across the surface of the water here would hit the hull of large ships and sink them. All the way through were large Turkish cannon emplacements in concrete fortresses. As the British and French troops or ships tried to sail through the Dardanelles to access Russia, they were in great danger. This was almost impenetrable for shipping from the Aegean and Mediterranean, where the British and French troops and ships were, to Russia via the Dardanelles. So, when we're studying this topic, we need to know that the Anzac was a combined military force of the Australian Imperial Force and the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. It's the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. And we need to be careful that we know how to spell that term. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps was formed after training in Egypt together. They landed at Anzac Cove on the 25th of April 1915 as part of the British 30 Corps. So here's Anzac Cove, tiny little notch in the coastline here. Their plan was to get across the Gallipoli Peninsula, this strip of land, the Gallipoli Peninsula, cut across and capture this side of the Gallipoli Peninsula, while other troops came ashore elsewhere. The British 20 Corps had troops at Cape Helles, and find that on our map. And the French Corps landed troops at Cumcale, it's sometimes spelt with an E, Cumcale, on the southern side of the Dardanelles. So this is a large operation. In fact, the Australians and New Zealanders were not the majority of troops there. There were more troops there from Britain, France, and the Turks than the Australians and New Zealanders. But it was very important to us because it was our first World War I action as a nation. The Anzac troops were well prepared and ready for their mission. They knew where they were going. They had detailed maps. In fact, their landing went quite well. They didn't come ashore at dawn, as is popularly remembered. They came ashore at night under the cover of darkness and actually moved quite well inland through the hills, through the gullies, before being stopped by Turkish defences. Soon, Anzac Cove looked like you would see it in a lot of our primary source material. So that's an image of what Anzac Cove looked like after a couple of months in 1915. In a close-up of the Gallipoli campaign Anzac area, we can see a number of the important battlefields. Here's Lone Pine, Hill 60, with retreats in places, including one of them at the Neck, some of the New Zealand battlefields at Kunuk Bear. These are high up in the hills, and we'll have a look at an image of that later on. The Anzacs advanced really efficiently at first through the hills and gullies on really exposed countryside. There's not a lot of trees. There's a lot of rosemary, but not a lot of trees. And the Turkish defenders held commanding views of the Anzac positions from up high. We'll look at a photograph of that soon. From those high up positions, the Turkish could look down on the Anzac forces, see their movement, and rain shells down with their artillery, rain explosives down, aim with their machine guns to stop the Australians' advance. The Turkish were well dug in, and soon the AIF and NZEF of the Anzac dug in as well, and we begin to call the Anzacs diggers, after the gold diggers of the gold rushes. They dig down into the surface of the earth to protect themselves in their own trenches. So just like the Western Front, we have trenches at Gallipoli on both sides. Both sides will now find it difficult to break a new stalemate. Let's now look at what a trench looks like. Have a glance into that Australian trench. Here we've a sign of their ingenuity, a periscope to save being shot by sticking their head up over the parapet, sandbags, troops sleeping, hiding, keeping covered in these trenches. There's not many troops in this trench, but there are always troops in trenches at Gallipoli.